Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
There is more to history between 1789 and 1815 than just Napoleon. Whilst it is totally understandable to be seduced by the story of Napoleon's life and rise, the harsh reality is that Napoleon was integral to European history and only from 1799 to 1815. Our fixation with the man has blinded us to a world beyond the Western Hemisphere, to the detriment of fostering a love of the rich seam of history that cohabited this period. Nothing epitomized this more than when Josh Provan tweeted about the 18th century Hawaiian king Kamehameha and pointed out that you could arguably describe him as more successful than Napoleon. That interpretation is, of course, open to debate, but that wasn't what caught my eye. Instead, it was the suggestion that, from multiple sources, that Kamehameha could not possibly be an equal to Napoleon for one simple reason: his skin color. Tonight, in the first installment of a new series on forgotten figures from far-flung corners of the globe, we kick that bigotry into touch. This is Kamehameha, the Napoleon of the Pacific, up next on the Napoleonic Wars pod. Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod, where, as you can tell from that intro, we have a bee in our bonnet. I have the spectacular Josh Provan, the master of adventures in Historyland, author of Wild East and Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira on the Maratha and Jat campaigns, and there is a new addition to his repertoire that you need in your life. Christmas is coming. Ask Santa very nicely. I'm sure he'll help you. He has published Every Hazard and Fatigue, The Siege of Pensacola, 1781, which is about, as you might have guessed, the Siege of Pensacola. The clue is rather in the title. Now, if you don't know what the Siege of Pensacola was, fear not. We are recording very soon, and we will have an episode on that incoming. All I will say is American Rev and the Spanish. If you're surprised by the fact that the Spanish are involved in the American Revolution, it's an indication of two things, my friend. Firstly, you need to hear the episode when it drops. And secondly, you need to go buy that book. There you go. Josh, great to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm tired. I'm in 5 places at once, doing a lot of things with the book coming out. Excited about it, though.
Are you flushed with the euphoria of the release? Have people sort of been, I don't know, queuing through the night to buy it from Waterstones when it comes out?
Absolutely, of course. I mean, what else would you expect from a publication of this magnitude?
Indeed. Okay, well, firstly, congratulations. It's never easy to get a book finished and over the line, he says, from bitter experience, because that Crime and Punishment book is like 10 pages written. It's appalling. It's a travesty. I need to sort my life out. And I hope, genuinely, I hope it sells well. We will talk more about that in due course when we record on Pensacola itself. Kamehameha, you've already had to correct me on the pronunciation. This is going to be a problem, I suspect, over the course of this episode. Apologies in advance, folks, if we do screw up the pronunciation. Hey, everybody's learning, right? I want to just, before we dive in, I want to go back to that tweet because we've been threatening to do this episode and launch this series for quite some time. And there are going to be quite a few of them because there are a lot of figures that people just don't know about. And there's a lot of history that people just don't know about. Did it catch you off guard when people started, kind of launching this biggery with a very, very, it's not even an undercurrent, it's a current of racism underpinning it? Because Twitter is always a dumpster fire, even at the best of times. But I kind of expected a little bit better. And that was, as much as anything else, what sort of offended me with the response that you received.
When I tweeted it, I wasn't really paying attention. I tweet things on whims a lot, and that day Kamehameha was on my mind, and I thought to myself, the old chestnut that he can, the parlor room chestnut, that he could arguably be considered more successful than Napoleon. So I decided to tweet that with a rather nice portrait of him that was done towards the end of his life. And I thought as I put the phone down to myself, that's either going to be completely ignored, or it's going to sort of blow up. And I was actually quite surprised, to be honest, because usually tweets like that just get lost. You have a few people saying, "Oh, cool, Kamehameha, that's fun." I visited Hawaii, sort of like that, but. No, the Napoleon Brigade caught it, and they ran with it, and we had a lot of "how dare you" sort of things. The energy was very "how dare you" compare this nobody from some island in the Pacific to the greatest man who ever lived, essentially. There was and the usual sort of brainless parroting of the same words as if that says everything. There was a lot of Twittery sort of stuff. So yes and no. It caught me by surprise that it actually did accrue a lot of likes and interactions over 2 days, but I wasn't expecting it to.
Yes, Twitter is, as I say, a dumpster fire at the best of times. It's amazing what picks up and what doesn't.
Do you know what the weirdest thing is? That it's quite obvious that nobody had the foggiest idea who he was either. All the stuff they were parroting at me was like, they didn't even Google his Wikipedia page to even look him up.
And this was very much the premise behind the series. I'm sure somebody will instantly take to the reviews section and go, "This podcast is woke." Well, if you want to, mate, then knock yourself out. Genuinely, go nuts. Why not? I could do with a review, even if it is a 1-star. But that's not actually the premise behind this. This isn't about turning. I mean, we're going to discuss this. Was he a rival to Napoleon? You're going to get your chance to make that case. But the point of it was, as you say, the ignorance. People didn't know what they were talking about and who they were talking about, and yet they had strongly held opinions regardless. And it did make me think that there is a huge need for what I'm going to sort of very loosely and tentatively describe as a diversity series, i.e. can we sort of go a bit beyond? And it's poor, actually, that we haven't done more on this line. I mean, you and I have sat down and talked about a variety of figures. We've talked about China, I believe, during this period.
Yeah, we can call that the bonus beginning of this series if you want. You could include that, I suppose.
We have precedent for kind of going beyond the norm, but nowhere near enough, I guess. And so this is very much focused on, let's try and tell some of the stories that just get pushed to the sidelines because and I'm guilty of this, I'm seduced, inverted commas, by the stuff that we always talk about, Peninsular War, Waterloo, the Napoleonic Wars, the French Revolutionary Wars, American War of Independence. But it's very Western Hemisphere, right? And so I make no apologies for the fact that we are going to give you some stuff that you're not going to be familiar with. And if you don't like it, then you won't listen to the episode. But you should listen to the episode, because if you don't know about it, then you're going to learn something. And that's fundamentally the point of this show. It isn't to just sort of reinforce, your comfortable consensus and knowledge. It's about giving you stuff that you don't already know. So if you don't like it, then, well, you haven't quite got the premise of this show. I'm very sorry. Enough waffling from me. Let's dive into before we dive into this, Kamehameha versus Kamehameha. You told me that there is a pop culture reference in this that you need to enlighten us about.
Oh, yes. Well, I don't think I'm the right person really to do that, but apparently, I think it's Dragon Ball Z or something like that, that one of the characters has a move or a strike or some sort of magic ability. And yes, you're all laughing at me who are like cool and had a childhood that involved this, but I learned about this backwards. You all learned about Kamehameha because you looked at what on earth Kamehameha is. I learned about Dragon Ball Z because I read about Kamehameha. And I believe the story goes something like the creator of the character needed a name for this thing that this character does, and he either asked his wife or someone in the room, and they came up with Kamehameha because he was awesome. And so he put that's what he called this particular move in the cartoon series. That's nowhere near appreciate. I've never watched Dragon Ball Z, so I'm a poor witness for that. But I know it exists and it's a pop culture reference. And as we saw from the tweet, a lot of people have only ever heard of Kamehameha because of this.
I mean, we must admit, and it's not really a secret on this show, that pop culture references are really not my bag either. So I think at best we can describe this as the blind leading the blind. But nonetheless, it says something about the guy from the off that there is a pop culture reference. There's a point of knowledge there. Is that an indicator, perhaps, that if you are somebody who's born in what we call the Far East, somewhere in Asia, you're more likely to be familiar with his story than perhaps even Napoleon's?
That's a very good question, actually. I don't know how famous Kamehameha is in what west of Japan, you might call it, where we must admit Napoleon is very popular worldwide. People in Japan and China, there's a lot of love for Napoleon, interest in Napoleon.
India as well.
In India as well. So I don't precisely know how famous Kamehameha is in Asia. In the Pacific, though, he's legendary across the Pacific.
Okay, so let's start doing some real history in amongst all of this. Hawaii, late 18th, early 19th century, that's fundamentally where we're going to live, inverted commas, for the next probably
that would be
2
fun.
episodes.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
It would be nice. If somebody wants to fund that trip, for we need a research trip to Hawaii.
You want the documentary that goes along with this, right? You want us
absolutely.
to travel around and look into
100%.
the distance and say stuff.
Stare moodily off the top of Kilauea,
absolutely.
And it's got to be done. Kilauea is a volcano, if people are wondering. A very active volcano, although I wonder if it stopped being active. But at the time that I was doing my geography A-level, it was the world's most active volcano because it had been erupting constantly for like 20 odd years, 30 years.
See, so many facts, so many new things are being learned in this episode. We've got geography, history. Send us to Hawaii. Who knows what we'll achieve?
Indeed, the possibilities are endless. Let's park the geography, even though I was a better geographer than a historian as a child, ironically. Hawaii, late 18th, early 19th century. What's going on? I guess we need, this is not a period of time and a place where people are going to be familiar with context. Shall we start with things like the nuts and bolts of society? System of government, way of life, what's it like?
Okay, well, in sort of a nutshell, I'm restraining myself from saying macadamia nutshell, just so we don't end up traveling down the wrong road ourselves. But Hawaii, and there are you. I again want to start off by saying I'm very sorry for my Polynesian pronunciations for all of these things coming up, but I'm going to try my best. Hawaii and its neighboring islands had a semi-feudal system in place when Kamehameha was born, and before that, going into antiquity. At the top, you have the king and his immediate family, so you can have that, and that exists in various kingdoms across the islands. There's not just necessarily one. And then you have the nobility, who are called the alii, and the priesthood, which are closely connected to that. And then you have artisans and other necessary jobs, and everyone else. So it's a very recognizable feudal society if you want sort of a comparison to Europe. The society developed, of course, in isolation, though, from a pure Polynesian root, going back to the first settlers who came over from Tahiti and populated the islands. Over time, you had local ali'i nuis, who, for want of a better word, high chiefs, laid claim to territory, went to war with their neighbors over the usual things: land, resources, pride, religion. Meanwhile, their civilization did continue onwards in what you might call island time, so quite slowly. And their main staple of food was fish, as you might expect, because it's a massively maritime environment. And the population of the islands, you're looking at around 120,000, 600,000 people in 1778. And by all accounts, it wasn't an easy life, but it was a relatively healthy one by comparison to a lot of places in the world. So that's a sort of a sketch of what you can write whole books about.
Okay, so that's the way of life. What's the recent history prior to Kamehameha's birth?
Mm-hmm. So in 1722, you have a king of the island of Hawaii, and he has a remarkably long name. Okay. His name, as far as I can say it,
Does it require a drum roll?
If I say it correctly, it does. Otherwise, it requires like one of the a boo sound. And I don't see any way I can say this properly. I believe you can get away with calling him Kiawe, but the full name appears to be something like Kiawe Ike Kahiali Iokamoku. I had to say that quite carefully. I think you can say it faster, but he was actually the king of the island of Hawaii, or most of it, and he died in 1722, and a civil war erupted between his sons. However, it was his nephew, Alapa Inui, who emerged as the successor after killing both his cousins. He reigned until his death in 1754, when yet more civil strife broke out. So essentially, at least on the big island, the island of Hawaii, you had continual power struggles every time power changed hands, in which the population tended to suffer quite a lot, and it's quite unstable. So again, nutshell time here, you're dealing with fairly long reigning monarchs and power struggles as soon as they die.
I mean, that's bloody, right? That's anarchy. Is this a common problem within the history of the period, or has it actually been quite stable prior to this?
It depends on the king, really, and how difficult it is to basically claim your right, and how wide the kingdom is you're dealing with. In this case, you're dealing with the majority of the big island, Hawaii, and yes, it's fairly common because you also have a lot of children because the kings marry a lot of wives. So, and you can have obviously cousins connected to it. You can have a whole spread of alliances and claimants depending on the situation. So it's always a problem.
Does nobody try and intervene and sort of say, look, we're going to create a law that is designed to stop this?
Well, we're going to kind of talk about that, aren't we? Actually,
I mean, this is sort of perhaps a slight spoiler, but I'm just kind of making the point that there's an obvious way to sort of solve this problem, isn't there? Why doesn't somebody sort of get a grip on this sooner?
Well, it's the same reason why you have this problem in Europe in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, really, and across the world. To be honest, if this is the way you, if this is the accepted way that you identify your rulers through primogeniture and right, and then you complicate that by having essentially it's an insufficient word, but it's sort of a harem structure where someone can claim through a more favored wife that I have the right, or but at the same time, the guy at the bottom of the ladder can say, well, my mother was still married to the king, so what's wrong with me? And I'm tougher than him. So this is just sort of what you get when you have this somewhat chaotic structure of succession, really.
It becomes a case of who has the biggest stick.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go into the specifics of his life, and apologies, folks, I know we're spending a lot of time kind of talking about the background, but this is all sort of important context. I just want to talk about how the history of this gets passed down. I may be misremembering this because I wrote these questions quite a long time ago, but my understanding was that Hawaiian history is basically an oral tradition. Is that right? There isn't a lot of kind of writing things down, and that is in turn going to feed into the next part of this, which is we're not entirely sure when he was born, and we're not entirely sure who his dad was, are we?
Not 100%, and at the very least, there's some controversy for a few reasons. Yes, up until the arrival of Europeans and the establishment of Europeans in Hawaii, you don't have a written language. You have, and therefore, history, stories, culture is transmitted through word of mouth. This is held by usually by the priests and religious and holy people, usually are the caretakers of these stories, but also the elderly, and the elders, and indeed special artisans and praise singers and things like that. So you do have that problem. And that does contribute to a lot of myths. A lot of the stories about Kamehameha and the legends surrounding him and the history of Hawaii in general gets written down after the establishment of the kingdom by officially royal appointed historians, private historians, Europeans who came over and studied and interviewed elders, and you get a sense of a very rich history, but of course by what you might call European classical standards. Some people dismiss it out of hand because it's not written down, which is unfair, and it's a poor use of the source. That is why there is this sort of slight murkiness about his origins. Like you say, we don't actually know when he was born 100%. All we know, it was likely in the autumn, sometime between 1736 and 1740. That's the most reliable guess of when he
Sorry,
was born.
we have a sense of the season, but not the year.
Yes, there is a poem or song which identifies a season of the year, which I believe translates literally to winter, but people seem to say that it's actually trying to say autumn. I'm not a linguist. I can't help you with that, but that's what I've read. And the the date basically is that a number of people after his death told people when he was born, and they tended to have a range between 1736 and 1740. However, you'll also see quite a lot. You see one or two saying that he was born as late as 1761, which I don't think is really possible, given how old he would be at particular times in his life going forwards. There's a certain weight, it has to be said, being laid on 1736 or the 1730s. So we should probably be looking at the 1730s as a likely sort of decade of when he was born. And yeah, there's no real firm evidence, though, to really tell you one way or another, except that, again, you have some Europeans showing up and trying to figure out how old he is by looking at him. Problem is that Europeans routinely misguess the age of Polynesians by looking at them. Usually they were much younger or older than they would guess. And that was the case for Kamehameha as well. And then there's the problem with his father. So his exception father was a chap named Kiowa. He was a son of Kiawe, of the very long name. He had ruled the island, save for the Hilo district, in the late 17th century and the early 18th century, but based on some oral traditions and some unspecific evidence provided by Kame Iamoku, who was Kamehameha's counselor of state and his mother's cousin. And the 19th century historian Samuel Kamakau, they identified Kamehameha's father as a ruler named Kahekili II, who was actually the king of Maui. And he had apparently adopted Kamehameha at birth and sent his two half-brothers, who are the twin sons of his father, to act as Kamehameha's guardians. The veracity of this, whether you believe Kame Iamoku or Kamakau, it's not clear where they got this information from, or so therefore how reliable it is. But supposedly the counselor of state, told Kamehameha this at one point in his life, and it's plausible because the adoption of children, a little like in Japan, was quite common in Hawaii, in terms of sons would be adopted for diplomatic purposes from rival places. And indeed, if he did send his two half-brothers across to become his guardians, then that's a very strong sign of attachment to Kamehameha. But I believe that this is the only source that tells you about this. And later on, Kame Iamoku's great-great-great-grandson, King David Kalakaua, who became a later king of Hawaii, spoiler alert, he said it was rot. He said it was rubbish, that this was all made up, and he had nothing to do with Maui. But at the same time, Kamehameha might have fostered this idea because he had ambitions to take Maui for his to add to his own kingdom. So that could also have something to do with it. The point is, however, Kiowa is the guy that most people say was Kamehameha's father, and Kamehameha recognized him as his father. He didn't recognize Kahekili as his father. So it's confusing. There is some debate about his father, but there is also no particular reason to believe the Maui connection over the other one.
Okay, so all very complicated, and a reflection of if you don't write stuff down, people tend to forget.
There's no birth certificates, let's put it that way.
Indeed. What implications does all of this have on, I guess, his aspirations? What would the young Kamehameha have expected his life to look like as it was pre the events that we're going to talk about in due course?
It's a very interesting question, actually, because Kamehameha appears as a sort of a figure of destiny from the moment of his birth. Practically, he is spoken of as a special child. There were specific signs in the heavens. Halley's Comet, possibly, was in the sky. There was a great storm. It was said that these signs collided to indicate that a child born on this day to this family in this place would be a warrior and a killer of chiefs and things like that. And it was also he didn't have a particularly normal royal childhood either. He was ferreted away to keep him safe from enemies because it was a time of civil strife when he was born. So I don't think he ever. It's very possible that from a very early age he had ideas that he was destined for something great. He may not have had sort of like, oh, I'll just go through the motions. I'll learn how to be a noble. I'll learn to fight. I'll go to war. I'll accrue honors, and I'll have a family, and etc. No, he seems to have been from the beginning identified as someone who was going to do big things, but. And as far as who his father was and Maui and things like that, it didn't have a great deal of impact on him. Like I say, the supposed Maui connection might have just fed into there. Like, oh, I have a connection to Maui as well. But the key thing about Kamehameha as well is he knew that no matter who his father was, that his mother was directly related to Kiawe of the big name. So you can bypass the fathers if necessary. He was always this was a guy who was going to grow up with big ideas and big ambitions.
Okay, so a sense of destiny about him. Remind you of anyone, folks? You can almost see where we're going with this one. But in contrast, of course, to the dreaded N guy, who Ridley Scott has catapulted to. Josh buries his head in his hands. Yeah, maybe we won't go down the Ridley Scott rabbit hole, because I recorded with Rachel Stark on Josephine, and she was taken aback at the level of sass that exuded from me. I can't think why. But yeah, you can obviously different kind of social background, quite obviously. This is a guy who is from the upper echelons of society, and he's looking to try and cement that position, I guess, in the upper echelons of society. Let's talk about his early political career. He's prominent in court, so he's not kind of at the sidelines by any stretch of the imagination, but he holds a religious position, at which point we need to pause and first of all rabbit hole on what religion looks like on Hawaii, to then get a sense of things like how significant was his position, what was his position, what did he actually have to do day to day.
Well, I don't know how much detail exactly I can give you on his day-to-day routine, but I'm sure it included a lot of exercise because he was a very fit guy.
I'd imagine he sort of went to sleep during some bits as well and ate some food. So there you go. We've answered that one. Fairly
normal in some ways. Yeah, fairly relatable in some ways, I would think. Just like you and me.
Yeah. You get sleep? What is this madness?
I'm very lazy. I sleep when I should be doing other stuff. But yeah, so to begin with, religion in Hawaii was very old. It's older than writing. There's not just a creation story, but an understanding that since any story had been told, the sea, the wind, and the islands had always been there. But in the beginning, there was only, and I'm going to go get a bit lyrical here now because we're talking about mythology. But in the beginning, there was only Po, or the eternal darkness, a sightless, unfathomable chaos. And from out of Po came Kane, who split away from the darkness, followed by Lono and Ku. These three banded together to create various conditions for life, and who created the other gods and spirits. Just as in the time of the gods, for the Hawaiians, the universe was alive. It was populated by many powerful and oftentimes mischievous spirits, who people had to live in balance with. One of the famous ones, which people may know of, is Pele, who was the god of volcanoes, and so one of the most powerful and feared spirits. But though Pele was destructive, it was her literal molten essence which formed the very rock on which the kingdoms of Hawaii stood, and the minerals thereof which made the ground so fertile. So there you have a kind of an idea of what you're dealing with and the way people appreciated the world, even though the time of the gods was past and now their work was done, but they still inhabited the world that the Hawaiians lived in. So religion therefore was practiced in special sacred places, shrines and temples, and special festival days through offerings and songs and hula. Religion and law were quite closely connected, and religion was kept sacred and the people kept in order through kapu. This word is sometimes used to refer to the ancient Hawaiian religion specifically, kapu, and it essentially is a law or a ban. A king or a holy man could lay a kapu down on practically anything. As an example, there was a kapu regarding food. Coconuts and bananas could only be eaten by men of the ali'i class, and women couldn't eat them, and nor could women eat with the men. They had to eat segregated.
Why?
Just because the priest said so.
Okay, it's this one of those moments where you turn around to me and go, "It was a different time, Zach."
You have to understand the significance of bananas and coconuts to to the balance of nature. All right, we can mock
Next, you'll
this.
be telling me that they weren't allowed to eat fish except on Fridays.
I don't know what the days of the week were called in ancient Hawaii, or even if there were days of the week.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, that is an assumption about a Western construct.
No,
good point.
I think poi or ground fish which is ground into a paste was the fairly common staple of most Hawaiian homes. But yeah,
we're going to have to do like a whole follow-up thing on Hawaiian food during that point, but we'll double back to that.
Oh, should we?
I mean, maybe not, but I know certain listeners of this show will be shouting at me if I don't. So we'll consider that.
Okay, we'll see what we can do about that. But anyhow, yeah. So even ali'i women could not sit with the men when they ate. They had to go away and eat with the girls. And then you had rules about the interaction of the nobility and commoners. A commoner was not allowed to look into the face of a nobleman, of someone of the elite class. That could be punishable by death. I've even read, it could be exaggeration, I'm not 100% sure, because you do have to remember that missionaries came into Hawaii at some point, and it was in their best interest to slightly exaggerate some of the things that were going on. However, I will also say that in the years after Kamehameha's death, the royal women did everything they could to break this way of being. So it was quite clear that not everybody was happy with it. So there may actually be something in this. Anyway, there's even some stories that if an ali'i's shadow was interfered with, that could cause repercussions. Like if it happened to fall on you, that could be bad news. It probably depended on the religious sort of status of the guy you're dealing with here, because the shadow could represent many things to many people if you think about what a shadow is. But yeah, you have as well. So these are the kapus, and this is what these are the in their extremities, in their madness, and also in their more practical ways. These are sort of the building blocks, the pillars of understanding and law and life in the islands. But another part of Hawaiian religion and spirituality is mana, which I've heard explained a little like this. People have a big love-hate thing with the All Blacks and the haka. The reason for that is mana. They're drawing energy to themselves, and it collects and it is exuded in an almost physical force. It has a martial aspect to it, and in Polynesian culture, both sides would perform a haka or a hula before the battle. That prickly feeling you get down the back of your neck when the All Blacks really get going, that's their mana hitting you.
There are very good reasons that you would attempt to do something like that in terms of intimidation and firing yourself up and all the rest of it.
Exactly. That's all part of it. It's all part of it. But it was much more encompassing than that. Mana was seen as a physical element that could be increased and cultivated. And it literally became lodged in your bones through good deeds, right action, and success in war. That brings up a slightly scary element of it, because I mean this literally. They believed it embedded in your bones. So if you killed an enemy who had great mana and you wanted to obtain it, and you could. Yeah, I see. Yes, you're making a face. You see where I'm going with this. The only way you could possess it was to take the body to a temple and burn and boil the flesh off the bones to release it. The man did not have to be alive. He could be dead. This wasn't necessarily that hardcore, but this was a common ritual during Hawaiian warfare. Kamehameha performed it a few times. This is where the legend of Captain Cook being cannibalized came from, because the British thought they ate him because they found little bits in the Hawaiian town where he was killed, and they thought they'd ate him. But actually, he was basically cremated, and the dead body was boiled up basically to release the mana to benefit the guy who had orchestrated the killing. This goes to say that Kamehameha's mana, and I'd like to point out that it's a very common concept today as well. Mana still exists amongst Polynesians and Hawaiian culture. You can get it. People believe that it comes to you just by being a good person. You can do it by being brave. You can do it by surfing a wave. You can bring it to you. It's about energy. It's about power. It's a very interesting concept, actually. And it's very ancient. And Kamehameha had a lot of it. He had always very strong mana, even from an infant, and he was accorded the honor of becoming guardian of the war god, Kuka Ilimoku. That's the guy Ku that I mentioned earlier, by the way, one of the big three guys at the beginning. And he got this role on the death of his uncle and protector, Kalaniʻapuʻu, as a sort of consolation prize for not succeeding directly to his throne, because he had to give it to his son. And the guardianship of the god brought increased responsibility and mana and land control to Kamehameha, who had been noted as a formidable warrior in conflicts in the 1750s, even when he was a young man. So they figured he had prophecies about being a chief killer. He was very, very brave. He was very able, strong. And he was also, Kalaniʻapuʻu's ward. So made sense to give him a strong religious position that he could occupy himself with. This didn't make him a priest. This just meant that he had control of this, almost like a diocese, if you will, and he controlled the idol and when it was taken out on feast days and things like that.
Okay, so he ends up in time garnering considerable support from the chiefs of the island, but also quite far afield. We're talking as far afield as New Zealand. Lots of questions here. Why does he have that backing? How does he gather it, accrue it? And also, how and why is the prophecy of the Naha stone significant in all of this?
Well, you're back into sort of legends a little here. As we've said, he's a man of destiny, and he's not only a man of destiny because he says so, but it's also because there's a lot of support for him being that. Even Kalania Pu'u is not 100% sure that his own son should be succeeding him. He gives Kamehameha the guardianship of Ku because he's a very important man in his own court. So I don't exactly know how or when precisely he gets sort of wider Polynesian recognition. That might come later, to be honest, because people in New Zealand are quite a long way away, and I'm not sure until a representative of Kamehameha arrives there that the Maori are going to really be like, did you hear about this Kamehameha guy? He's something pretty special. But it is the case. His name did eventually spread far and wide because of his deeds and because of these legends associated with him, these significant religious things that are associated with him. And some of them are distinctly Arthurian, if you want to use a European parallel. The Naha stone is a really good example of that. It is a massive lava rock that is found in Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii. It was taken from Maui sometime in deep antiquity, and it resided there. And it was supposed to be immovable unless you were a chief of Naha descent, which is a particular level of elite and quite an obscure one, because, well, I'm not going to go into it because it's much too confusing, but it's a very specific thing to be of Naha birth or to be able to move this stone. It's not supposed to be able to be moved, it's too big. And there's a very interesting story that is online and available if you Google the legend of the Naha stone. It'll tell you in a lot more detail how Kamehameha interacted with it. But basically, I believe it was when he was around 14, possibly in the 1770s, depending when you believe he was born. He goes up there to test his strength and prowess and whether indeed he seems to be fitted for destiny. And he basically is going to go and try and move the stone, and he does. He doesn't think. He actually goes up to it and he looks at it and he says, I don't know actually if I'm going to be able to do this. But he does move it. And this is seen as a massive deal because one of the guardians of the stone basically say that he who moves the stone will move the islands. And the implication is that this is a prophecy that he will conquer the islands because he's done this. And so that at that young age, with the connections he has, is how he is able to gain a lot of support amongst the court of Kalania Pu'u and Hawaii generally, as he goes forward into sort of major leadership positions.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Does this basically mean he was a very hench 14-year-old? Because, I mean, everybody must be aiming for this, right? If you can move this thing, then, you know, this says something about you, and this makes you a contender. So there must have been a considerable number of people who were up for giving it a go. So does this just mean that he was a ridiculously strong, you know, was he the Eddie Hall, you know, Britain's strongest man, but of Hawaii?
That depends on how, I don't know, how in tune with the spirit world you are, Zach.
I mean, I was raised on Newtonian physics, not like
right.
literally, but
that's going to be problematic for you here then. Yes. First of all, he was an extremely strong man. By the age of 14, you get the impression that yes, he was already fairly physically developed. And he was already a great learning, or well on his way to becoming a great wrestler, fighter, runner, swimmer, surfer, and he grew to quite an impressive height, and you would notice this guy. He was a big guy. But the key to the Naha stone is not physical strength. It is that if you are this person, if you have this in you, you will move it, no matter how strong you are. If you are not this, you can't move it, and that's the key.
It's very sort of sword in the stone, isn't it?
Yes,
very sort of Arthurian legend. No, I know I'm being facetious, as is ever my way. Next up, we come to the Oluwalu massacre. Excuse me. Let's try and say that again. The Oluwalu massacre. Or is it Oluwalu? Listening to your pronunciation of Hawaii, I'm wondering if I've got that wrong. But in any case, what happens? Why does it happen, I guess? What's his involvement in it, albeit in a limited way?
So first thing, I'm slightly leaning into a Polynesian pronunciation of Hawaii, because somebody tried to correct my spelling of Hawaii in the infamous thread, because they thought I was misspelling it. As far as I'm aware, proper pronunciation of saying Hawaii is Hawaii. I'm actually softening that just because I know the vernacular is to say it Hawaii. You don't need to actually lay stress on that. But it's respectful. If you want to say Hawaii, then you can do that. So I believe, yes, the W is pronounced like a V. But it probably is Oluwalu. But you can say Oluwalu. People will understand what you're saying. This massacre is a symptom of the gradual increase of Euro-American traders in the Northern Pacific. It did not immediately involve Kamehameha. It involved a very unpleasant individual by the name of Simon Metcalf, who was an American trader who came into the Pacific with his son, Thomas. And they had been on an extended cruise, and they had agreed to rendezvous in Kaliakalaua Bay. I think I'm saying that correctly, but it's the famous one that Captain Cook rocked up into, and so everybody kind of knew what this place was. Now Simon is in a brig called the Eleonora, and he immediately starts annoying the locals along, I believe it's Maui, the shore of Maui, but pretty much anywhere he goes, he annoys people. And then the classic Euro-Polynesian conflict arises when some locals steal one of his boats. This happened to Captain Cook. Captain Cook got killed by his response to this problem. And it's because iron, which is used in the construction of the boats, in the nails, is very valuable to Hawaiians and Polynesians. And so they would sometimes try and nick a boat or two so they could take the nails out. Through a rather unfortunate sequence of events, Simon Metcalf, who turns out to be just a complete psychopath, arrives off Odawalu, and he is greeted by a flotilla of friendly boats that come out to trade with him. This is very common. It happens all the time in Polynesia. And he opens fire on them just because he's angry, basically. There's no excuse at all for it. It's just he wants to kill a whole bunch of Polynesians to show them that you can't steal my boats. And having wrought his havoc, he goes on his merry way into Alaskan waters, where he continues to cause trouble, not realizing that he's just dug the grave of his son. Because coming behind him, completely unaware of what has been going on, is Thomas Metcalf in the, I believe it's a schooner, it's a small tender ship called the Fair American. And he goes up the coast trying to find his father's ship, and instead, that chap I mentioned earlier, Kamehameha's chancellor, takes his revenge. There's only about 4 or 5 guys on this ship, and he sends his warriors out and kills every last man aboard, takes the ship. However, there is one guy who survives, who basically, I believe I've read one story of him basically hiding at the, well, he climbs to the masthead, which is the only place the Hawaiians can't get to. And he manages to hold them off long enough that he gets them to promise to not kill him when they get him down, basically. His name is Isaac Davis. He was a Welshman, and he is miraculously spared the righteous vengeance, one might say, of the Hawaiians. Possibly because I honestly have a feeling that he might have been marked for death once they got him ashore, to be honest. But Kamehameha heard that this ship was in these waters and what had happened. Now, he had actually already captured a European whose name, I think his name is John Young. He was an Englishman, I believe. And he'd been captured when he came ashore from the Eleonora looking for information about Thomas's ship. And he'd just been captured, and he'd been sent to Kamehameha. Kamehameha had obviously been interested by the guy and what he had to say, and was fairly interested by Europeans as well, because they were starting to crop up along the islands, and they had interesting boats and weapons and things. And now Kamehameha finds out we've got another one. Not only have we got another one, but we have a ship, one of their ships. We actually have one of their ships. So he says, don't kill him. I need to know how to sail this thing. I need to know how it works. I need to know what these cannons can do. And so this is why the fallout from the Odawalu massacre is that Kamehameha gets 2 military advisors, which are actually just 2 random sailors that rocked up on Hawaii and probably just talked a big game to save their hides. But because most sailors knew how to fight with swords, daggers, knew how a musket worked, knew how a cannon worked, and obviously knew how the rig of their ships worked, they did literally become very important and were treated like chiefs by Kamehameha as a result of this.
Interesting. Okay, so how does this then feed into his actually coming to power?
Well, it feeds into his conquest because Kamehameha, includes as many cannons as he can find and buy off passing European traders, muskets, European swords, European pikes, axes, anything he can get his hands on, and he issues them to his warriors. Obviously, the more elite ones get the better stuff. Davis and Young train them, and they also train a special crew how to sail the Fair American. And he uses this technology to dominate the waters around Hawaii and also to create his army. It gives him. This is not to say that the other kingdoms, such as Maui, did not also start investing in trying to get as much of these new weapons as possible. It's just Kamehameha had the edge because he had people who also knew how to use them and were going to tell him how to use them. So that's very important. And you can see that decisive edge as he takes over the rest of the island of Hawaii between 1782 and 1791, finalizes the conquest there, becomes supreme ruler on Hawaii, and then turns his sights on Maui, where he invades. And this kingdom is defeated and conquered when he beats the traitorous Kaiana, a general of the Maui leader Kalani Kepule, at Nu'uanu Hali in 1795. That's his most famous victory. It's his most impressive victory. It takes place on this incredibly dramatic landscape with these tumbling mountains and sheer rock faces. Basically, Kamehameha lands. He's met by a defending force on Maui, and he forces the Maui troops back into a mountain pass. This is deliberate because Kaiana wants to trap Kamehameha's army in the valley and open fire from above with his own cannons and stuff like that, and cause a rout, which will be utterly destructive because the Hawaiians have nowhere to go but to the sea. However, Kamehameha has some sort of numerical superiority on his side. He's also intelligent enough to know how to use that numerical superiority, and he also has a much better army, really. And we'll get into that in a minute. But basically, he disarms the strategy, and instead of him being trapped in the valley, he traps the Maui troops in the valley and pushes them up to the top of the mountains and famously over the cliff. And you might say, oh, that's just dramatic license. I saw that in 300. They found an awful lot of bones at the bottom of that cliff. And that actually speaks to how real some of these, you can't just dismiss these oral retellings, to be honest, because there were a lot of bones found when they dug out, when they were building a road at the bottom of this mountain range.
Interesting. So in terms of legitimacy, now that he's gone and done all of this, I mean, what's the process here? How is he accepted? Do people have to sort of swear obedience to him?
Pretty much. It's the accepted rule in Hawaiian warfare that to the conqueror go the spoils. People will come and they will swear allegiance to him on sacred places and things like that, and he will dispense justice on those he believes to be worthy of mercy, because he literally holds life and death in his hands. This is something he can execute an enemy if he feels that is what is necessary to be done. And this happens in 1795 when he conquers Maui. This is a massively decisive moment for him. Maui is now his. He is recognized as the king of both Hawaii and Maui, partially, I should say, because he has to now go back to Hawaii, beat down a rebellion from the people he's left, to their own devices over there. And then he has to plot the conquest of the rest of the islands, because there's more to Hawaii than Hawaii and Maui. There's a lot more. There's actually even more than the famous named islands like Maui, Kauai, Hawaii. There's also Ni'ihau, for instance, at the far end of the chain. But by this point, these kings have have heard of Kamehameha and his army, and they really don't want to mess with him. So by 1810, he makes treaties with these people who recognize him as their sovereign, and the unification of Hawaii becomes complete by 1810.
He also seems pretty aggressive, I guess is the word. An army of 10,000 soldiers, 960 war canoes, all used to capture Maui, as we've talked about, and Molokai. I'm going to go into, excuse me, into a sort of army rabbit hole at this point. What does this army actually look like? And I mean that in the literal sense.
What do you mean, what they wore?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll talk about, discipline and all the rest of it in due course.
Well, yeah, although they had connections with the outside world, with passing traders and stuff, this is still a recognizably Polynesian army, a Hawaiian dressed army in culture, language, and organization. And so you're still looking at a feudal force, essentially, made up of nobles and levies, as you would imagine such a force to compose of. The warriors wore very little. At the very top, Kamehameha and his chiefs were resplendent in ornately feathered cloaks and war helmets. Their bodies were tattooed with significant signs and pictures, all of which told a story about how they'd got them, why they got them. Some of them would be completely covered in tattoos, and Polynesian tattooing is done in a specific way, and it's very painful. The bigger the tattoo, the more you have to endure. So the highest chiefs were quite remarkable to look at. And you can actually see examples of this in Hawaiian museums today. You can see Kalaniʻapuʻu's war helmet and cloak, and it's made of tiny little feathers, but it's really amazing. And then going down the ranks, the tattooing remains the same. Anybody can I would assume that there's probably some sort of bar as to how low a peasant you can be in the rankings, but generally speaking, warriors are from the warrior class. A lot of them are drawn from some sort of minor nobility and things like that as well. And so you see a lot of those same sort of tattooing traditions through the ranks, but generally speaking, you don't see a lot of body armor particularly. There is some examples of a type of body armor I've seen. There is some variation in helmets and hats, but generally speaking, they're not wearing a lot. They don't really need to, because the level of technology in hand-to-hand combat weapons really only require you to protect your head if you're going to protect anything at all, because you're dealing with, before the introduction of muskets and steel and iron, you're dealing with spears and clubs, various forms of clubs. The most intricate of which are small various sizes of paddle-like weapons that are serrated with shark's teeth, which the elite tended to use and hold as a badge of rank, and they were very deadly with them. You can do a lot of damage with these weapons, make no mistake about it. And like I said before, the higher levels of the army are going to be issued with muskets and swords, axes, and pikes and stuff that they've gotten from various channels of European supply. And then there are the people who've been trained to use the cannons. The biggest problem that they face, that any Hawaiian army faces, is the problem that they don't have an endless supply of powder and musket balls. So certainly with the cannons, they had to improvise with stones and wood to create a kind of a grape shot when they ran out of cannonballs, which is actually still quite nasty at close range. So And as well as something to remember is the way Kamehameha organized and used his troops. So the better armed ones with the European weapons, I believe he tended to use as almost a little bit like commandos and as his mobile reserve, so that he could deploy them where he needed them to go to create the biggest impact. He was also very aware how scary cannons were, even if they didn't actually kill anybody. So this is sort of a basic idea of what you're looking at. Another thing to remember is, and just let me just check a second to make sure I get this right. Hawaiian nobles were proficient at unarmed combat as well. And it's called lua. And so in hand-to-hand combat, they utilized throwing, sort of judo-like throwing, and nerve strikes that targeted the vulnerable points of your body, and they didn't need a weapon to be able to break your arm, break your wrist, dislocate a shoulder, snap your neck, basically. But when they used it in conjunction with their weapons, these people were not people you wanted to mess with at all. So that's an idea of the sort of army you're dealing with.
Is he inclined, and is there an expectation that he gets stuck in as well? So would he be a lead from the front, or is this much more of a kind of a tactical concept where you kind of alluded to this already? He's got his reserve, and he's more focused on kind of making sure the deployments are sufficient to meet his needs.
When he was a young man, and when he was still proving himself, certainly in the conquest of Hawaii, I believe he did get stuck in. He had to prove himself as a warrior to begin with. He was more than capable of fighting personally, if the need required. But I don't think he's sort of an Alexander the Great figure who just charges off on the right flank and wins the battle by his force of will. He was a bit cleverer than that, although there are certain instances where he has no choice but to be in physical danger, such as when he's in some of the sea battles and stuff, and I believe he commanded from the Fair American or one of his larger war canoes. And there, when it's this sort of warfare, it's not broadside to broadside. You have to board the enemy vessel. He's going to get stuck in.
How does discipline work? Yes, I know people are groaning about crime and punishment rabbit holes here. We're not necessarily talking about crime and punishment, but just in terms of that general keeping the unit together, maintaining cohesion on a battlefield. It's very easy for this to sort of descend into a brawl. So how do your, inverted commas, officers, your more senior nobles, maintain that control in order to maintain the cohesion of the unit as a fighting force?
I think that it depended on the where in the army you were. Some of the sort of strike squads, for want of a better word, are probably highly motivated, highly disciplined, highly attuned to each other, and once they're given a target, they all work together to do it. Personal responsibility is very key in feudal armies, especially armies that are not necessarily engaging from a distance. The armies that require hand-to-hand combat to achieve the objective. So, these sorts of armies, once they are committed to the action, you really can't pull them out easily from what they're doing. That's why a very good understanding of reserves and timing is essential for victory in these sorts of battles. That's what gave Kamehameha the reputation of a great general in the islands. So discipline is absolutely, like you say, the reserve of the nobles. Kamehameha was very strict. So were his holy men, so were his generals, and their word was law. If you got an order from one of these people, you did it, or there were serious consequences for that. Likewise, in camp, you can go into crime and punishment if you want to a certain extent, because that law still applies. The kapus still apply. King's word is law. My general's word is my word. don't cross the elites. Do what they tell you to do. This is how you get the mana. This is how you get into action and get a name for yourself. So like you have an interesting thing where Kamehameha actually gives orders in some of his mid to later campaigns that restrict the excesses of his troops. In Hawaiian warfare previous to this, you were pretty much allowed to do anything you wanted to the enemy population. They're kind of forfeit until the war is over. Kamehameha said that no, you're not allowed to just abuse the people I'm coming to conquer because I'm coming to rule them too. And unless I say so, you're not touching these people. My kapu is on them, so you can't do anything to them. And these rules were very seriously enforced. So there's definitely a discipline aspect through Kamehameha's army, but there's also still a traditional warrior ethos-driven Polynesian sort of single combat. Calling out your names and your feats before the battle sort of tradition as well.
Okay, we've talked a bit about his traits as a commander as well. This is a guy who likes maneuver. We're going to start to sort of dabble at this point in the comparisons or otherwise that you can and can't draw between Kamehameha and Napoleon, just to kind of go back to that tweet and start making the case here. Obviously, warfare very different. There'll be people sort of saying, well, look, this is a less technological type of warfare. Therefore, is there really that scope to be tactically as complex as European warfare was? To what extent can you really class this guy as, inverted commas, a genius of war? I'm going to let you start to sort of make the case either for or against when it comes to this guy as a military commander.
So the thing to remember about this sort of comparison is that it's not meant to be a mathematical one. It's not meant to literally compare what physically Napoleon did, faced, and experienced with what Kamehameha did. The thing to remember is that they were contemporaries, but they were completely isolated from each other. If Napoleon had been born on Hawaii, he would have had to have faced the challenges Kamehameha faced. That is, very little wheeled transport, no cannons, no modern conveniences of waging a war that has been developed over Europe through centuries. You're dealing with a much... It's not... I don't think it's fair to say that it's the European way is superior or harder or anything like that, because if you put yourself in Kamehameha's shoes and you have no context of anything that is more challenging, if you have to put it that way, then it doesn't make any difference. You're still faced with the objective, how do I unify the islands by military and political force? Only with less means, practically. I don't have gunpowder. I don't have cannons. I don't have a logistical system based on a ridiculously robust French economy. Hawaii is, I believe, literally, geographically, the most remote place possibly on the planet. It's the furthest away from any continent in the world. It is bang smack in the middle of the Pacific. So you get an army of 10,000 men and you get them to Maui and across to the other side of this chain of islands. Go on. I mean, that is, by comparison, Napoleon trying to take Russia. Only Kamehameha succeeded.
Now that is fighting talk, my friend.
This is how far you can go. You can have fun with it. I mean, at some point of it, but there is truth at the same time, because the comparison is meant to see what they achieved and what lasted. and they're very similar in a lot of ways, even though they have nothing to do with one another. They were both made of destiny. They both wanted to bring peace by conquest, by unification by conquest, my will. I'm not going into morality here either, because Kamehameha was absolutely a monstrous tyrant to the people of Maui, who came over and slaughtered all of our warriors and did it very effectively. I don't like this man, but he now has the power of life and death over me. This is the unfortunate problem of being a conqueror, and Napoleon tried it in Europe under European terms, and Kamehameha tried it in Hawaiian Polynesian terms. So this is the comparison. Hawaiian warfare, though, was very fluid. We've alluded to this before. It required a great talent to understand, and Kamehameha understood it from the ground up. He'd been a warrior, he'd been a chief, now he was a general, and he understood all of its facets, he understood its dynamics. So he was a master of it. You had to be, otherwise you end up losing, and losing bad, because Napoleon lost, was allowed to surrender, and got packed off to little islands where he could be contained or rule, in 1814, 1815. If Kamehameha lost, he's a dead man, and his flesh will be boiled from his bones, and the mana harvested to the victor, as just to basically prove that I won, you now are ruled by me. Simple as that. These are stakes that Napoleon didn't have to deal with outside, perhaps, of Egypt, being run down by Mamelukes in Egypt or something like that, or not even the Cossacks were going to kill Napoleon. They were just going to capture him and sell him, for heaven's sake. It's
how much would Napoleon Bonaparte have fetched at auction? Now there is a question.
It's an very interesting question. I kind of want to write an alternate fan fiction kind of thing about the Cossacks hiding Napoleon until they get the right, bribe. But anyway, we digress.
I mean, we do that a lot on this show.
We do a little, but Kamehameha was not just a traditional Polynesian general, commander, king. He adapted his forces to include modern weaponry to whatever extent he could implement it. He took a very interesting step in trying to protect civilians during his campaigns, because he knew how destructive the war could be on populations. He understood that it's difficult for places to bounce back if you completely level them. And I think this marks him out as a great general and politician within his own sphere. I'm not saying that if you transplant Kamehameha to Europe and he goes up against even the most disorganized European force, muskets are still a thing, cannons are still a thing, cavalry is still a thing. Kamehameha didn't have to deal with these things, but he did have to deal with the challenges that he had. And if by the opposite token, you take Napoleon out of Europe and you plop him in Hawaii with none of those things, he has to use his wits like Kamehameha did. He has to make the best of what resources he has. And that is the comparison. The other comparison we'll probably get to in a minute, I think, about legacy and things like that. But general for general, Kamehameha is absolutely one of the great military and political figures of the long 18th century.
And we're going to stay with the politics now to kind of consider what he was like as a ruler. You've dropped some hints here, tyrant being, kind of high on that list. Talk us through it.
You're dealing with an autocrat in Hawaii, basically. This is autocracy of, in European terms, a Russian level. He has the power of life and death. His word is law. If he's having a bad day, he can literally have you killed. It's not going to happen because there are societal rules about how he acts. People who live at a different sort of technological level, so to speak, are not necessarily going to act out their feelings just because they want to. They are constrained by their societies, and there is that at play as well. Contrary to what some people said in the threads, he's not some sort of unwashed savage who is just rocking around doing whatever the heck he wants. There are rules. He has to live within these rules, otherwise he cannot become. You can't unify Hawaii if you just do this.
I mean, it's almost like, there's a civilization going on here that is complex in its own right, and not just sort of the 19th century missionaries' ideal of, well, they don't have Jesus, so therefore they are defunct and barbarous and devoid and, barely any better than the animals. It would be quite useful if people could wake up and sort of, I don't know, not even smell so much the 21st century, it's just smell the 20th century, people. There's a bit more to this than just they bad person, because I don't know anything about them, and so therefore I'm going to go, they're different from me. There's a complexity here, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that goes as well to how people perceive Kamehameha in Hawaii when he was alive. If you were on his side, he was Kamehameha the Great. He was a legend. He was an inspiring, charismatic man. If you were on Maui or or Kauai or Molokai, then he was the enemy. He was a tyrant. He was coming to kill your young men and steal your women and teach your children that there was no other king but me. This is the complexity of war, and in war, two truths can't exist at the same time. Kamehameha won, and again, you're dealing with a very ancient tradition of warfare here that was no longer adhered to in Europe, so particularly, but it nevertheless was a reality for Kamehameha. So you have that duality that you get with Napoleon. Absolutely, the enemies hate him, allies love him. It's up to you to read in further and see what you actually think about him. I think he was a very impressive man. He had his own flaws. We're not necessarily, I can't judge him for various reasons. It's difficult for me to judge Napoleon being a European, let alone being able to judge Kamehameha from where I'm sitting and from this distance. We can't really do that. It doesn't even help us to do so. But we can make mild comparisons because it's useful, because he is so far removed from the European theatre, but at the same time sharing the same time as the rest of the history.
It's almost like your argument was sort of subtle and nuanced and not, some kind of tacky throwaway comment by a pop historian, Josh. It's almost like you're actually a pro at this sort of thing and spend a lot of your time considering history. This is a baffling concept. What are you doing, man? Surely you know that history exists purely as sound bites. My facetiousness aside, let's talk about legal reforms, because we alluded to this earlier. What does he do? What impact do they have? And remind people why they are needed.
So basically, before Kamehameha, there was no particular protection offered to people under the law. This is ordinary people, so to speak. But anybody basically underneath you were liable to your wrath or your beneficence, depending on what's going on. It depended on the individual. Again, there are societal customs and norms that allow you to act in certain ways and various things, but there's nothing particularly written in stone that says you have to abide by anything. 100%. It's your own responsibility, essentially, to be a good person. Kamehameha didn't totally overhaul this system, particularly. Kapu's and traditions already in place remained in place. These would be dealt with by his successors, as I said earlier. For instance, he didn't get rid of the traditions of women can only eat certain things and have to eat separate. That was done by the women of his family after he died. These stuck around, so he didn't really bother with those things. What he did institute was a very powerful edict that offered the protection to everybody, the protection of the king. He offered the protection of the king to everybody with what is called the Kamehameha Mamalahoi, which is the law of the splintered paddle. The story goes, and there's always a good story with Kamehameha, that once he was pursuing two men across a lava flat, and he got his foot stuck in a fissure of the rock. Seeing this, one of the men he was pursuing turned and, wielding the paddle he was holding like a club, knocked Kamehameha senseless. The man left the king for dead and made his escape. And when Kamehameha regained consciousness and extracted himself, he seemed to have an epiphany of what it must be like to be helpless and powerless. And he made this connection not just with what the military event that he had taken part in, but what it must be like for a commoner to feel helpless in his own presence, in the presence of an elite. So he took this experience, and in 1797 he came up with this law. Now, it is undoubtedly more of an expression or direction of how to wield power than a strict law with many rules and regulations, such as came after him in the 1830s, when a lot of the concepts were codified. But it is a very impressive standalone statement of what people could expect from the king. And its summary is almost as if Kamehameha was wielding the very power of nature itself. I'll read it to you, actually, because it goes like this. O people, honor thy God. Respect alike the rights of great and humble. May everyone, from the old men and women to children, be free to go forth and lay in the road without fear of harm. Break this law and die.
I mean, that's emphatic, if nothing else. There's no dispute about quite what's going to happen to you. I'm guessing that the sort of the nuances of a legal system based on, you know, the testimony of witnesses and pragmatic systems of discretionary justice that I'm forever banging on about are not present in Hawaii at this time. That does sound as though there's not a lot of room for interpretation there.
Not really, no. It's simple, and therefore it can be expanded and interpreted because of its simplicity. But I think, like you say, there's very little room for argument that if you abuse the people that I say can do this, are free to live without fear of oppression, then I will deal with you. The king's law is this. And there's a lot of mana as well in this edict. This is a fully empowered king saying this, that I am the king of you all, and you're united under me. This is the one law I'm giving to everybody, and that is that I will protect you. You know, you have your place in society. I'm not messing with that. But if people try to take advantage of you, then I will protect you. My law will protect you. And look what that is doing. It's in a very, it's sort of a limited way, but it is gifting agency to the people, because though it's not explicit in its offering people of any station the right to be treated, it is vague, right? But it is sort of offering people of any station the right to be treated equally as a nobleman, if you think about it. So, in other words, he is dispensing the protection of the king. So if someone wanted to obtain the right type of agency, they could appeal to the king's law to get it.
Okay, so as you would actually expect if you stopped to pause and think about it, it's quite sophisticated in its construct. I'm conscious that a lot of this sort of gives us windows into what he might have been like as a person, but sometimes they're quite contradictory in terms of who he was. So what do we actually know about him as Kamehameha, and the knock-on that has for his rule and for how he rules.
Kamehameha is a wonderful subject for writers and filmmakers because he is so enigmatic as a person. He is a creature of fantasy as well as reality. What we know about him comes through to us from people who met him and wrote about him. We don't really have a lot of what he said himself or his writings or anything like that. We know that he was a very private and taciturn man, very thoughtful and strong, imbued with a very strong sense of destiny, as we've seen. He could also be mercurial when his anger was raised, especially when he was young. He spoke little and trusted few, but when he did trust those he trusted, he did so with complete I don't know. He trusted completely when he trusted. If you were his friend, if he relied on you, then he relied on you completely. But his very name means the lonely one, or one set apart. And he seemed to sort of take this as part of who he was. He's very difficult to approach at a personal level. And you can see reflections of these many traits in his rule. He cut a very fine figure as a statesman, actually, because he would seem to be fitted for greatness.
Does he have any influence on his name? And what I mean by that is the name Kamehameha. Do we know that that's the name that he was given at birth, or does he have a role in sort of crafting it? And I'm sort of got a slight. This is quite an artificial comparison, but I've got a slight eye on Napoleon and the way that he sort of he de-Italianizes or de-Italianicizes. I can't remember what the word is, but basically goes from Buonaparte to Bonaparte. Do we have that? Because it seems to fit quite remarkably. It's almost too much of a coincidence.
He does have, like many kings and rulers and chiefs around the world who have great religious significance as well as political power. He has praise names and other names that he's known by. And I believe the name that he had when he was born is different to Kamehameha. That I think, I wouldn't want to be quoted on this because I haven't looked greatly into it, because that's tied up with his lineage and everything like that. But I believe that he had Kamehameha for the majority of his life, and or a very close version of it. But it is possible that when that name was adopted, it affected how he conducted himself.
I mean, you kind of sort of alluded to this already, but in terms of family and personal life, I mean, the guy seems to be a bit of an enigma anyway. Do we have much on family? I mean, you talked about his wives. Do we get any sense that, there was a family man sort of tied up in all of this, or is it, sort of all very obscure, and we quite simply know that he had a family that had the legacy that you've mentioned already?
I would like to take the time to look into his many children and see if any missionaries interviewed them or anything like that, and if they had any memories of him when they were young or anything like that. I know that several of his children, well, many of his children actually lived into the middle of the 1800s, and some of them, there are lots of stories and events connected with them. I don't know 100%, though, about whether or not he was considered particularly affectionate or loving or anything like that. I would get the sense he was quite reserved, but that is just a sense I get. We know that he had a very large family. There are at least 10 children who are principally named, and the list of wives is also quite extensive. I think I counted on one list 17. Yes, I see the base.
17 wives.
At least. That's just one list I saw. These are partial
17
lists.
17 wives.
Now, some of them, I should say, we can be a little cautious about this. Some of them may have been political wives, and some of them may have been literal wives who lived at his court. But nevertheless, he had a lot of wives because he was king of all the islands.
I haven't had 17 partners, far less 17 wives. This is baffling to me. Maybe I've been living my life wrong, or maybe I've been living my life right. Who can possibly say? But there is an important, from all my facetiousness, there is an important point to be made here about cultural differences, right? And whilst you and I might sit here in our comfortable houses in England, and look on that and go, huh, what? Actually, polygamy was far more common in Asia, and the Pacific, and in fact the norm.
It's fascinating to wonder how it works, but we know it did work for a very long time, and it was again only in the coming of missionaries in Christianity and that's the continuation of the Kingdom of Hawaii and how it adopted Christianity and everything like that is a whole different story, one that follows on from Kamehameha's very wise foreign policy, where he managed to establish himself as a sovereign nation, as a sovereign ruler of a nation that could not be just dealt with any way people wanted. But going back to his family, we do know that he also had a principal wife, a favorite wife, because her name was Ka'ahumanu, and she was a great favorite who actually acted as his regent and was co-ruler with two of his successors, and she helped immensely in establishing the dynasty that I was just talking about there, and indeed in removing those constraints that women had in the old days as well.
All right, then. So the last minutes of the episode, make the case, Josh. Lay out your stall. I would say just take 5 minutes, but let's be honest, I'm not about to cut you off. Just inhale, take that deep breath, and it's you. You're not really inclined to sort of let rip and go wild. It's not really what you do, is it? You're too sort of laid back and well, not too, but you're very sort of laid back and surfer in your and genteel in your ways. But why is Kamehameha a rival to Napoleon in terms of legacy?
To put it simply, you can make the argument he was as successful or more successful than Napoleon because all sort of context, cultural, geographical aside, Kamehameha succeeded in making himself king of all he surveyed. His conquests were successful. He defeated all of his enemies and established a dynasty that lasted until, I believe, it's 1898. Although that dynasty was not purely his, by the time it ended, it went through several cadet branches of his family. It was still the dynasty founded by Kamehameha I that created the Kingdom of Hawaii that lasted until the Americans annexed it fairly illegally in 1898. And unfortunately, at that time, nobody was going to lift a finger to save the Kingdom of Hawaii. And that is why it is part of the United States today. Some people brought this up that he has no legacy, that he has no laws, that his dynasty was overthrown, like Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown in 1898. I say to this, Napoleon was overthrown in 1815 and never came back. His reign lasted, what, 17, 18 years? If you include the first consul bit, and only if you include the first consul bit. His son was disinherited from succession. There's a massive gap before his nephew gets back in through a back door, and we have the Second Empire. And that lasts for, what, 25 years or something like that? And that ends in 1870 when the Prussians capture him and the French say, we don't want an emperor anymore. Thanks very much. We have bigger problems to deal with right now. Meanwhile, uninterrupted from we'll say from 1810, if you want to be the latest you can possibly cite founding the Kingdom of Hawaii, to 1898, that's almost a full century. And if you include the part where he's king of Ali'i of Hawaii itself, then it's even longer. In dynastic terms, he also is more successful than Napoleon. He died with the knowledge he was going to be succeeded by his son or one of his sons, and that his wife was going to oversee this transition of power. He died with a dynasty in place, beloved by that point as a great leader, renowned across the Pacific, the receptor of European and American diplomats who wanted to come and do trade deals with him. This is why I humbly say that Kamehameha is arguably more successful than Napoleon.
Inasmuch as the master of Historyland ever gets angry with anybody, that, ladies and gentlemen, was Josh Provan, my favourite owner of a ponytail and the most mild-mannered man I have ever had the privilege to meet, getting ranty with you. You have been told. Folks, this is a point to be debated, but be debated in a mature fashion. As you have heard, there are a lot of cultural divides that mean a direct comparison is extremely difficult and should actually be discouraged. But in terms of considering Kamehameha on his own merit, what you've heard hopefully encourages you to think again about this guy's legacy and consider whether or not Kamehameha is indeed the Napoleon of the Pacific. Josh, as ever, it is a joy to have you on this show. Folks, Christmas is coming, so you need his books if you haven't sorted it out already. Wild East and Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira should frankly already be in your bookshelves. If they are not, Christmas is coming, so speak very nicely to Santa or your significant other, whichever you believe in. Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira, of course, is on the Maratta and Jat campaigns and is available via hellion.co.uk. Please go direct to support Hellion and your esteemed friend and author Josh that little bit more directly and effectively. But as we alluded to, there is a new edition for your Josh Provan collection, Every Hazard and Fatigue, The Siege of Pensacola 1781. It came out this week, in fact, a couple of days ago. We will be doing an interview. Well, we'll be recording the interview tomorrow. You'll get it a little bit later, but we have an interview incoming on that for you to get a little bit of a taster of why you need that book in your life. But again, please go direct to Hellion in order to purchase that. Josh, lovely to have you on, mate. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to another one in pretty short order.
Mahalo, everybody. And mahalo kaiku ana. Aloha, Zach.
See, I have no idea if you just said something lovely to me or called me a blithering idiot, either of which would be entirely valid things to do on this show. But on that note, folks, we will say thanks very much. Take care, and we'll see you again soon. Folks, if you're new here, remember to hit the subscribe button so that you can find your way back. And if you're loving the show, please remember to leave a review. It's the most powerful thing you can do to help the show reach a wider audience on our quest for 1 million downloads. Much love to all my Patreon supporters. Shout outs to my Mentioned in Dispatches patrons: Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Coulson, Jim Getz, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, An Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, Ulrich Decado, James Fluick, Roger O'Donnell, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinsky, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon-Smith, Roland Shark, and Jason Morn. And the Admirals: John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Ned Campbell, Graham Goodwin, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Steve Carter, and Clemens. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
Hey, it's Danny Pellegrino from Everything Iconic. Ready to upgrade your style game without blowing your budget? Check out Quince. They've got all the good stuff, shirts and polos, activewear, and fine leather goods, all at 50 to 80% less than other high-end brands. And the best part? They're all about safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get that luxury vibe without the luxury price tag. Hit up quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's quince.com/upgrade.